So, what was it like growing up on a farm?
It was it was very pleasant. I guess looking back, I think it was wonderful. At the time, what I knew nothing else. I was just like everybody else in the area, except for the few wealthy people of maybe 400 or 500 people in town. They were different than the rest of us.
But almost everyone was a farmer in your town.
Yes, yes, in that area, except the wealthy people in town who owned the hardware store and the grocery store, and there was a barber. there, there was a pharmacy. I never saw any dispense any drugs. All I ever saw was he was ice cream vendor. So
Yeah,
yeah, it was different.
kind of like Rite Aid of today. It's just the ice cream vendor, right? Yeah.
What town?
I'm sorry.
What was the town name?
The big city of 500 people, or what it was Lomira, Lomira.
Just like,
Yeah, that little village where we lived, the village was South Byron, and that had a total population probably about 60, 50 to 75, maybe, depending on who was in town. That was
so
it.
during the holidays, the population would double because family would come in and such.
There were some of that, yes. There were a few because some of the families would do that, although I think most of the people there were so many of them were retired guys. They would go back to their family farm somewhere in the area that their kids now were running. And they'd have the big family dinners and things there. So, because once you're there and you've been around the farm, you're going to spend the rest of your life with manure on your shoes. I mean, that was just accepted.
And how did the family end up on the farm? What's the family history that led to settling and starting the farm? What was the family history that led to starting the farm? How did the family end up there?
In ours place?
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's interesting though. Going back, I don't remember because we were Southern Illinois people, right down on the tip of Southern Illinois, and I think the person that got up into Wisconsin, if I remember this correctly, I'd have to check my mother's recordings to see, but I think it was my uncle who was the congregational minister who married a gal from college, North Central College, as I remember, where they were, whose father owned a nice farm there right outside of town. And so that's how then my youngest uncle, Kenny, Dad's youngest brother, he moved up to take over that farm. My dad was still in Northern Illinois. We were renting farms there because my dad never owned farm. My dad was a sharecropper, and it was not considered a very prominent thing to do. Just if you couldn't afford to buy farms and any sort of thing, and didn't like working for people, you could get into sharecropping. But he was very successful, and I'm sure you've heard the whole story too many times probably by now. But it was the death of our cows at one of those farms in Northern Illinois that led to the discovery of Coumadin, warfarin. That all came out of that little farm because we'd come out in the morning. I was very young then. I was probably 5 or 6 in that range. But I'd occasionally go out in the barn early with my dad to milk at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And we were losing a good hybrid, expensive cow, probably losing one every day or two for no known reason. The vets couldn't figure out what was wrong. They had no idea what was going on. They kept calling it black leg because there's blood down in the legs. And as the story goes, of which very little is probably true, that research was being done on our cows, and I don't know how they got the cows or anything more to the story, at University of Indiana, University of Illinois, and University of Wisconsin. Supposedly, University of Indiana was the one that discovered this being the blackleg being due to blood pooling there because of poor coagulation of blood. It just didn't clot for some reason. Well, and as they traced back with it, again, what university did this, I'm not sure, they discovered that it was the coumadin, sodium dicoumarol, which occurs in sweet clover. That's just a type of, like alfalfa type of hay, that when it ferments, it develops coumadin in the fermentation. Well, no problem. It never ferments. There's no place where it ferment, except that year we were short of corn, so we didn't have enough corn for the silage. You can't have cows without silo, the big silos full. So my dad decided that he was going to try putting hay, we had a lot of hay, put the hay through the corn blender, or the silo, and grind up the corn, just green corn and all, the stalks and all, up into the silo. Well, it worked great. We had silage. Unfortunately, that silage, when it gets in there, silo, corn, whatever's in there, ferments with time. Becomes very moist and ferments. That's where the coumadin was. Now, who actually developed it, I don't know. We know that the University of Wisconsin ended up with it. Somehow, they ended up with it. And that's where the name came from, as a rat poison. It's a great rat poison. And it was named after Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. That's where their research was. And that's warf. So the drug was just known as warfarin. And so it was an interesting time. And I was, of course, very young at that time. Somebody asked me, you're talking about being on that farm, thinking about it. There was one episode that I remember faintly, and I don't know whether I really remember it or whether I was told it so many times that it stuck in my mind. I'm not sure which, but I decided my dad should not have to milk all those cows early in the morning and putting on the milking machines and all that sort of thing. Why not just take a knife and cut into the udders? Let the milk come out that way. Just let it flow out of there. Well, I had, according to the story, and I still have the scar on my finger, according to my dad, he caught me with my hand up there holding that udder with my knife, trying to cut into the cow's udder to get the milk out. And I missed, and I got my finger. And I still have a nice scar in my finger from that cut. So I don't know why. I don't know if that really happened or whether it was a story that just kept making up.
Yeah, those are the best stories, the ones that.
But yeah, it's vivid in my mind anyway. Yeah, I remember that.
And so on the farm, it was your mother, your father, and you and your brothers. How many brothers did you have? And how what was the family dynamic there?
Yeah, well, that particular farm was owned by quite a wealthy Chicagoan that Dad was sharecropping for, which a lot of people did in that area. The wealthy people out of Chicago would buy these farms up around and have somebody run it for them, and then split 50-50 on the profits every year, and the way it was done. So it was a nice house. We had a nice home on there. It was Dad and Mother, and Bill, my older brother, was a year older than I was, and then Ray, who was 2 years younger, and then Paul, who was another 2 years younger than him, and then there was the baby Bob. So there were 5 of us, 6 years between the oldest and the youngest. But so we were very close, and we loved it. We had really a great life. Dad provided everything. We always had to have sleds for everybody. We always had a beautiful pony that he got for us, and we had that special harnesses so we could go sleighing with a horse hooked up to it in the wintertime. In the summer, we had a beautiful buggy. We harness up the horse and go anywhere we wanted to go, just riding in the buggy with the pony, or we just plain ride it. It was a fantastic, laid-back life.
So what was grade school like while you were working on the farm? How much time did you have? How much time were you in school? How much time did you have to spend out of school working? Because I know you had a lot of responsibilities on the farm.
Yeah.
So how was that work-life balance at such a young age?
That was always difficult because the school started, I say at 9. It might have been 8:30 at night, something like that. Because for any kids to go to school, you had to have all the cows milked. You had to have the barns cleaned, all the manure and everything hauled out, and new straw put in, and they fed, and all this before you could go have breakfast and then go to school. It was they were all little one-room schoolhouses. I think on that particular farm, when I was starting out the first couple of years, I'm going to guess is I think there were one other person in my grade that I started with. So it was, just the teacher and probably 15 kids in the entire school, like that, out in the country.
For all the grades? There's one teacher for K through 5 or whatever it was?
Yep. Always one teacher for it. And I never saw a second teacher in the school until, I guess when I got to high school. Yeah, that was all. Everything was always just little school, one-room schoolhouses. And I think we did fine. Those of us who did go on to school, that didn't have any problem coming out of those little schools. So it was a great life, but there was always that sense of a division within all the schools of the wealthy kids from the little villages around who had stores, or a grocery store, or a hardware store or something, and there were the farmers, and we were the farmers.
And what were the numbers like? Was it like 2 or 3 rich kids to 15 farmers? What was it? Was it mainly farmers? Was it kind of half and half? How did that work out?
Probably pretty close to the same. I would say pretty close to equal. Because there were schools so separated that farmers would, the farm kids off the farm would have to go a long way to get to school. Yeah. So, and the schools were reasonably close to town. Yeah. So it was broken up pretty much that way. But there was a distinct difference between us, and it really didn't end up making any difference with time, obviously. But at the time, we thought, we're just not quite as good as they were.
But that turned out to not be the case.
It really didn't. It really didn't. But
and then moving on to high school, so the school got a little bigger for high school. There was a couple teachers. How did that work out?
yeah. Now the high school, what happened as we going from place to place, this was all in northern Illinois that I'm talking about. We got up to Wisconsin when my uncle, the youngest one that had the farm there, when he bought another farm, and we moved up there so Dad could farm my uncle's place, that one. We moved into that. And then at that point, there was something going on between my dad and my uncles I'm not sure of on the farm system. I think Uncle Kenny, the younger that owned the farm, I think he wanted that farm that he had bought, that Dad was running. So Dad would go over to the farm that was owned by the other brother's father-in-law, a nasty old guy. So we moved into that farm. Well, that school, that one-room schoolhouse right next to that farm was closed by the time we got there, over there. So that was halfway through my 8th grade. So I had to go into the city, Lemira, of all these 500 people or so, whoever it was, to go to high school there. And it was a big change. It was kind of a blow because there were about 20, I don't know, maybe 20 or 25 at the most kids in my class, and we were shared a big room with the 7th grade. I was halfway through 8th grade with the 7th grade. And they had another 20 or so. So this was a big school, really big school. And I spent my last half of my senior year there, and then stayed right in the same building to go to high school. Yeah.
And so the high school and the middle school were on the same complex?
Yeah, there was no such thing as middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that time. All we had was
high school?
8 in high school. And high school kids, we started out with just the same numbers you'd have in your grade school, your 8th grade, go right on into the high school until usually through your second year of high school. By that time you're 16, and most boys didn't continue going to school when you turned 16. You just quit and went back on the farm. So then it really, the numbers dwindled when we got to that point.
So where was the second farm located in Wisconsin? What town was that?
They were both right around Lemira.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lemira and South Byron, all those little village towns scattered around there. Yeah.
But so even though most males did not continue going to school, you did. You finished high school.
I finished high school. Yep, I sure did. I finished high school.
And you played sports, right? You played basketball.
Yeah, I started out. I was going to play all sports. Well, in my freshman year, I made a mistake of trying to tackle a running back who did play college ball. And he hit me so hard when I tried to tackle him that he broke my left arm, and unfortunately it fractured right just below the ball of the arm. So I had to go in. There were no orthopedic surgeons in town. They took me into Fond du Lac, the big city with the hospital, and I laid there for a little over a month, and I don't remember the times, in traction, pulling my arm out and holding up 2 different traction systems, and couldn't move, just to lay there to let it heal, because that's all I could do. So that was the end of football. No more of that, because I only weighed about 105 pounds, I'm told. So,
Yeah, not too well suited for football.
but I did learn that to play a sport that I had never heard of and I never saw, called basketball. So I had to try to learn to play basketball. So I did that. I did play that. I could hear bad. I did go, the second year, my sophomore year, I did go back to play football again. That's when I got banged up in the first game, and it wasn't even an official game because we weren't allowed at the time. It was during the polio epidemic. We weren't allowed to have games, but people would come in from other schools and we'd play. And that's when I remember being hit from behind with a block when I was chasing somebody downfield, and that's when I tore up my knee. So I was on therapy there for that. The dad refused to let him do surgery on it, probably for good reason, because he had his done. It was a terrible result. So I was on therapy there, but by early spring I was able to walk and run and learn to play basketball. So I did that. And baseball, I loved to play baseball, but I couldn't play in high school because that would come in the spring when I had to be working. But I could play with the local leagues, during the summer. On the weekends, I think what they call them, pony leagues or whatever they were at that time. I could do that, play that. But that was it. The other competition that was strong in the high schools in that area and throughout Wisconsin was, I'm blocking right now, where you have, anyway, it was writing and delivering talks, writing orations, oratorical contests. You played local contests and league and district and this out of times. That was a big competition. And you got letter sweaters just like you do for athletics when you were going a letter. So I was very active in that. And I was again a farmer. So I was from out of town, so it wasn't, it was very different. The strange things was, and I'd forgotten about it, my brother Ray reminded me, and I don't know how this, my older brother Bill was the president of his class his freshman year. I was elected president of the class in my freshman year, probably because I was in the hospital at the time they had the election. I was still in. They thought this crazy kid from the farm tried to play football. And Ray, behind me, he was president of his freshman class, and he thought the other 2 younger brothers were too, but I have no idea whether that was true or not.
The records are lost to history.
Yeah. Yeah, I can make up all kinds of things about that.
Yeah, exactly. No one's gonna know.
Yep.
And so, what led to you going to University of Wisconsin? How did that come about?
Oh, yeah. When there is one scholarship to University of Wisconsin for the valedictorian of every high school in the state of Wisconsin. That was a standard there. Regardless how big it was or how small it was, there was one automatic scholarship. Well, I thought I had that one. And I think everybody in the class thought I had that one. Somehow, and again, this story has been told so many different ways, I have no idea how true it is. Somehow, one of the guys who was always my competition at everything, all the way through high school, his mother was the secretary to the high school principal. Somehow, before the announcement was made in selection, he had one of his grades, I think it was in typing, upgraded from a B plus to an A minus. He became the valedictorian and he got the scholarship. And all it was tuition. It really didn't amount to anything. But that made me angry. So how did I go on to college? I didn't know just what I would do. In the meantime, my dad had done it. I found somebody from, I think it was the Elks Club in town, that encouraged him to have me go to West Point, Military Academy, West Point. So somehow I did it. I don't remember going through this. I did it because I got an appointment, not as a number one, but as a number two guy to West Point. Fantastic 4 years of free college and military officer, all this sort of thing. And again, I don't know how that worked out, but somehow it didn't come down to me as the guy to go. And it passed on to another young guy who was a friend of mine from Fond du Lac, the big town. And he went in place of it. So I didn't know what I was going to do. But I was, the one thing that, we're very strong in the church, Evangelical United Brethren Church. So Dad and my uncles, they all insisted I go to North Central College, right outside Chicago. And so that's where I enrolled in there. Went to college there and disliked it immensely. Things like, I wasn't really, it's obviously it was a religious school, but it wasn't strictly enforced. But and I made some wonderful friends there, but either Tuesday or Thursday, I can't remember, it was 11 o'clock in the morning, everybody in that campus, you see the size of the campus because we all met in one room, in the big room where they did all their theater and band concerts and that sort of thing. We had to go there and go to chapel. Had to go to chapel, whether you like it or not. And they took roll call as you came in. I did not like it there at all. I just didn't like it. It was just not my cup of tea. And I never have been a social type of guy. I'm strictly an introvert. And I'm pretty sure I never had a date those 2 years in college. I just went to school. I played a little ball and met with friends and this sort of thing, and that was it. That's all I did. So it was not good for me. Then why? And I still don't understand all of this. But an uncle, who was my mother's brother, was a troubleshooter for W.T. Grant 10-cent stores nationwide at that time. And he had taken a store in Provo, which is right near Salt Lake City, where Brigham Young University is. But he had taken a store there, and somehow, and it must have been through him, somehow word got out there that he had a nephew that could play basketball. They had no idea. They couldn't dream of how bad I really was. But word got there. And at that time, a lot of changes were happening in basketball because Jack Gardner, who was the premier basketball coach, like Krzyzewski is at Duke now, He was down at Kansas State. He took the job up at Utah. And so they brought in all these guys. Somehow, my name got in there, and I went to the University of Utah. And they were so good to me. They were going to do all kinds of things for me. If for the, not me, but all the transfer guys that came in. I was to be, if I could get into medical school, they'd keep me on the squad during my first year of medical school, so I had a full scholarship during the time. Then they would arrange financing for me so I could go to medical school there. And I thought, this is heaven. This is heaven. Well, obviously, once they found out my talent, I didn't play my basketball. I was done, so there was no scholarship. I went back home to Wisconsin to figure, well, what I'll do, I'll just, and in the meantime, did get accepted to medical school there, which kind of surprised me and my mother, particularly, was following this very closely. I'll step back a little bit in time where I was told when I applied for the medical school there that they're only going to take 2 freshmen into the medical school each year who were out of state and out of area. They'd take other out of states if they were right near next door states, but I was out of area. So I fell in that category. Take 2 of those. Well, the interview was absolutely incredible. It was like a dream world, the stupid stuff I was being asked. But I did get in. I got into med school. I got accepted. So I went back to Wisconsin to raise money. And every place I went asking for money to go to medical school, I was laughed at. I mean, what do you mean? What do you mean? If you can't afford to go to medical school, you don't go to medical school. That's what it is. So I thought at that point, what am I going to do? Well, I had an offer. I had an opportunity to take a West Point at that point, go to West Point through there, which I was ready to take, because at that time there used to be a moderate amount of prestige from these little towns if you graduated from military academy. But Dad and I and Mother, we talked about this at length, and if I did that, I'd have to start all over again after that period of time, the 3 years of college. I have to start all over again as a freshman there. And so I just didn't want to do it. So with tuition being almost nothing at that point in Wisconsin, since I was still a resident there, I went down to the University of Wisconsin for my senior year. And I had finished my undergraduate work, but never taken a degree because I didn't need it. I was going to go to med school. So I did spend that year taking graduate courses and had a master's in genetics, but I never finished it. I never wrote the thesis. Once I got accepted for medical school at Wisconsin, then I didn't need that, so I didn't write the thesis. But that's how I ended up at Wisconsin. And great time, 4 years of medical school there. That was like a whole different world to me.
And you had to sign with the Air Force, right, to do med school at Wisconsin?
No, what I did there was when I went to Wisconsin on that 4th year when I was going to graduate school and all, I would take jobs wherever I could get anywhere to raise enough money to be able to live there. And in the meantime, I forgot to mention when I was in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah, I did join a fraternity, which my mother particularly was very upset about. That's only for the rich kids who would join fraternities.
Minutes. So we're good now. We're back on. We're good.
I'll just continue from where we were.
Yeah, I guess just start again with the house mother and fellow.
Yeah, so I got approved as a house fellow, which again kind of surprised me, because there was only 9 of those, as I remember, on the entire campus that we got in. Nobody wanted the job, probably, as I remember. And anyway, I did, but the only fraternity that would hire me was an ag fraternity made up of all farm boys off of Greek Row over toward the ag school on that end of campus, but it was free room and board. with nothing to do. So I obviously had to take that. So I did that my first year in medical school, which I was never there anyway because we were going to school from 7, usually 7 in the morning, 7 to 7:30 we'd start, and we'd go till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, 6 days a week. So it was, I just lived there. I lived there free. It was very lucky. But then I couldn't, obviously, it was not a pleasant place to be in that ag fraternity. So I went back to my old fraternity, the Lambda Chi Alpha, where I was a member, and asked them if I could be a house fellow there. And quite a few of the members in the fraternities, the guys that had come back from college after being in the service, so they were guys my age or even a little older in the fraternity, and they hired me. So that's where I spent my second and third year of med school as a house fellow in that fraternity, living very nicely there with a private room and private bath and all the guys upstairs. And it was just lucky, purely lucky. And then during my third year of medical school, I did hear about the military stepping in and paying tuition and all expenses, putting you on active duty. And so I applied for that, for the Army and Air Force, just filled out all the paperwork and went for interviews. And I got accepted by the Air Force first. They accepted me, and I was dead set I was going to go into the Army, because I didn't know anything about an Air Force. But I was afraid if I didn't get that, I'd be stuck again. So I took the Air Force acceptance. And we only had something like 2 or 3 days, and I'd had to let them know. I let them know, all right, I'll take it. And that was the end of my third year. And we didn't have any break in school once we started our third year of med school. It went right straight through, all the way, without any breaks, all the way to the end of your fourth year. So I accepted that, and the break-off time was, I think, the 1st of June, something like that.
What year was that?
What's that?
What year was that?
That would have been the June of 1958. Yeah, 1958. So I did that, and then immediately I was in my third year, I was starting my fourth year of medical school, and I thought I'd just stay over at the fraternity if there's a place to live. When the University of Wisconsin did not fill all of their intern slots, when you have to have a certain number of interns in a university to be able to continue accreditation as a training program for specialty training and all. So again, I don't know how this worked out, but I did get a chance to talking to the dean of the medical school, who was a nice guy, talking to him about it, about what they're going to do, and he gave me, along with another, 4, 5, 6 guys, I don't know how many there were, gave us an externship, meaning we were interns and got the full benefits internship, and that is room and board and just living right next to the hospital and nice quarters. The first time in my life I had a private room and all that sort of thing. And so I was in heaven at the same time at that. Then I got accepted by took the Air Force thing, and my pay started. So I was being paid as a second lieutenant in the Air Force with the benefits that go with that, including housing allowance and all that sort of thing. At the same time, I was getting free housing at the university and free food 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for that whole year. So again, I was living like a king. And during that whole year, as an quote, an intern that I was supposed to be there, they gave me the assignment on the psychiatry and ENT. During that whole year, I got called once for an emergency. And they wanted me to come over. I went over there. They wanted me to pack a nose for a bleed they couldn't get stopped. And I had to say, I have no idea how to pack a nose. Guys, call the resident. So the resident came in, ENT resident came in and packed the nose. So that was a free year. And I was I was living like a king, really, at that point, I thought, and Mother and Dad weren't very happy about this because I suddenly had too much money in my pocket. So I had to buy a car, and I needed one because I had to go to at least one other hospital periodically for things in town. So I needed somehow to get there. I bought I guess you want to go into all this car stuff.
Oh, yeah.
One of the guys that were leaving to go into service had I'm trying to think of which car that was. It wasn't a Triumph. Yes, it was. It was a Triumph TR2. It was a TR2. So I bought that from him for almost nothing. I used one that I could get around in, but it had no top on it. So in the winter, it was a little cold. So I had that. When it got too cold, I had a chance to sell that. In fact, I figured I had to get rid of it because the engine was really acting up. And I found out later why. Because I was not checking the oil enough, and the oil was done, I was ruining the engine. So I was able to get rid of that, and I got on an even trade from a guy there right near the campus, a little guy that worked on cars, foreign cars. He traded me even up for that TR2 for a Jaguar XK120. If you look those up, they're incredible racing trains. There's coupe. They made them in convertibles. I had the coupe. I mean, the hood was a mile long. You know, it was a beautiful car, black car with red leather, and I had this for a while. The folks were very unhappy about my having it, but I had it. And then when it really got cold in the winter, that one wouldn't start. Wouldn't start when it got real cold. So again, I got hooked up with some guy there, and he had somebody that wanted that, he said, and he had a car that I don't know how he got a hold of, but it was a doctor's wife's car that he had available, that he made a trade for me on. It was a 1955 Buick Special convertible. Bright yellow with red leather interior. Most god-awful looking thing you've ever seen. He traded me for that. So that's what I had. In fact, I took that to Hawaii with me later. So I was living like a king. I was living like a king. I thought this is the world. I'm now the luckiest guy in the world. And at the same time, and I'll throw this in there with it, made my life, I was sitting in a library at night, somewhere doing some work on reading up on all the cases that I was assigned to up on the floor during my fourth year. It was just starting my fourth year of med school by that time, and in the midst of it. And I'm sitting there in the library, and I saw go through the library the prettiest girl I'd ever seen in my life. Really, just bowl you over type pretty girl. So I had to find out who she was. And one of the guys there in the library, I asked her, he told me who she was, but she's engaged to one of the guys that graduated last year, and he's out in Denver taking an internship. All right, but I still want to find out who she was. I saw her up on the floor. She was a student nurse, and she was friendly. So I decided I'd keep track of what floor she was on this time as a student nurse, and I'd go up to one of the study rooms on whatever floor she was on section, and so I could run into her and get to know her a little better. And then we started spending time together, and I thought, and all I ever heard from the other guys was, "Hey, you know who she is? That's Diane Hansen." He said, "What the hell is she doing with you?" That's what I kept getting, and we got to be very good friends, very good friends. She went back to Denver, Colorado at Christmas for the guy that she was supposedly engaged to, and she assured me she was not engaged. She went back at Christmas time to see him, apparently. So she came back, and I ran to her in the hospital, and she said, I said, "Well, how'd everything's going in Colorado?" She said, let's go have a hot chocolate." So we went over there, and she told me, she said, It's all over, Lee. It's all over. No more. So then we did become close friends. And that was so, during that time, I was, to me, if you can imagine a farm kid who never dated, never had any involvement with any emotional experience with women, to suddenly be the middle of this life with what was considered, she had been a cheerleader, on the university cheerleader all the way through school. She was a queen of a couple different things they had there. And I said, what the hell what is this what life is all about? I was bored. So that was the end right on through. My last three, I finished all my academic stuff in about late February, early March of my senior year in 1959. And we had to, and at University of Wisconsin, you had to spend about 3 months out somewhere around the state with a private doctor who was a clinical professor then at the university around state. And I got assigned up to the Sheboygan Clinic, where Johnsonville brats come from. Yeah. And I got assigned to the clinic there. And it was, you live in somebody's house, a room, they give you a bedroom to sleep, go and sleep at night after the hospital. But you could get away over the weekends, the one I had, get away. At the same time, Diane went to Milwaukee to do her OB part of her nursing because they didn't have it at the University of Wisconsin. So she went there and did it. So on the weekends, I'd go down to Milwaukee, pick her up, and we'd go over to Madison for the weekend, or out to her folks. Her father her family lived out of town a ways. Again, I was this poor kid off the farm with this yellow Buick convertible and the prettiest girl on campus. And she never lived that down. I still keep contact with her, and we joke about it, about the thing. She said, yeah, I heard it all the time too. What are you doing with him? Oh, crazy. But I thought that's what life is really all about.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and it was, she came, when the day I graduated, my folks could not make it to my my med school graduation, which really bothered me, but they couldn't. Because they had, in December, either January of 59 or December 58, in the wintertime there, they had sold the store and everything in South Byron, a little store, and they moved to Phoenix. They packed up a trailer, hooked it behind their car, and drove to Phoenix. So they were gone, and they were only there about 2 months, 2 or maybe 3 months, I can't remember about that time, yeah, that Uncle Vic, my uncle that was the congregational minister, who loved beer, he had left the ministry. He had a big church in Chicago. He left that and became a farmer out there, bought a couple of farms there. Well, he had a stroke and died. He was 49. And that was more about a 30-minute drive from Sheboygan Clinic where I was. So when I got over there, I didn't think my folks would come back. But somehow they must have flown back, otherwise they couldn't get back that fast. But they always talked about the fact that they wouldn't go anywhere except on a bus or a train. So I don't know how they got back there, and I spent the time with them there. But when they had to get back to work down in Arizona, so they had to go back, and they couldn't turn around and come back again 2 months later for my graduation then. So they didn't. So I had uncle and aunt had a nice little party for me, and Diane there, and that's when we said our goodbyes. And I was thinking, she was going to stay there, and at that time nursing school was 5 years, and so she had another year to go, and then I headed to Hawaii, and that was a big emotional blow to me, and I don't know why. It was just one point in my life, but that happened to be a tremendous emotional blow to me. And I don't know how you can't be you can't be unhappy and sorrowful in Honolulu, Hawaii. I mean, it just doesn't exist. At that time, Hawaii was not a state; it was just a territory. And some of the roads right away from the city weren't even paved. You know what? And the airport was two big old Quonset huts sitting out on the edge of the runway. And when the plane landed, remember when I got there, the plane landed, I stepped off that airplane, all I could smell was flowers. And that's the way it was for the whole year. I mean, it was another world. And we get together regularly, as I told you, once a year, our guys that are still left from that group, and we all talk about it. It was just magic. It was magic that we couldn't comprehend, walking into this sort of thing and living that year. But it was a life. And I was there about less than 6 months. I was there probably only about 3 or 4 months when I got my Dear John letter. Diane stating that I won't be responding. I won't corresponding anymore. I'm going to marry Chuck. Well, Chuck was a guy that I knew reasonably well because I lived in the interns residence quarters when he was a resident. He was a chief resident in anesthesia, and he really took off with her when I left, and so she decided she was going to marry him. That was the end of the world. It was just a crazy time in the life. We go over this, the guys that are left, and we talk about this every spring. It was just hard to believe what we called magic. It was a magic life. We couldn't comprehend what we were doing and what we were experiencing because none of us knew this. Even the guys that came from big cities and they were tied up in medical school also, working 70, 80 hours a week. I mean, we just no such thing as time off that last couple of years of med school anyway. You just lived medicine, and that was all you did. And so it was a chapter in life
that's a great first and second chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where we left off was Hawaii. You were just starting to talk about Hawaii.
Oh, I can't. In Hawaii, that's where we were talking about Hawaii.
Yeah, we were talking about how it was such a magical place. Pretty much talking about just right when you got there. So
yeah, it was.
Yeah, how long were you there? What were you doing?
Yeah, I was there for the full 12 months, and the way we got there, we had to drive to some point of ship for our cars. So I drove from Wisconsin to San Francisco and dropped my car off at the naval yards there in Oakland, and then went and got on Air Force plane out of Travis, which is close by, and took off. And when we got our cars about 6 weeks later in Hawaii. So that was up until that point we were kind of isolated as far as doing anything, which is probably good. It made us stay there and work. So we couldn't go anywhere. We did, however, we got very active in things on the base. We had, for instance, a big bowling alley, and we had one sergeant whose sole responsibility was running the bowling alley and teaching bowling to anybody that wanted to learn. So we did a lot of stuff bowling there. I had one very lucky time. They were constantly having little tournaments at the Christmas, what they called the Christmas 369 Open. That year would have been the Christmas of 59. So you were given a strike on 3rd, 6th, and 9th frame. So that was automatic for you. And I ended up with about an 800 series, which was impossible. Because if I'd have to get a strike before and after one of those automatics, it would roll. And particularly in the 9th, if you had a strike in the 9th and then you strike out in the 10th, your scores get very big. So I did that, and all I went out of that, I don't know whatever happened to the trophy, but the win was I got a new bowling bag and a bowling ball made the way I wanted it, and it's somewhere in the family. And bowling shoes. That's right. We got the shoes given. So that's what I did. We did. We just did a lot of stuff there, and we had a movie theater we rarely ever went to. If most of our time we did have time off, we'd go down to into Waikiki, which was a very short little drive just down the hill from where the hospital was up high, not just right down the hill, down by the big Hickam Air Force Base and into Waikiki. And there was one section in the beautiful beach portion, right in the center of Waikiki, where open to military only. We had, it wasn't fancy. It was, if you wanted to stay overnight, you stayed in a little barracks room. But otherwise, it had its own little bar, and we were the only people out on the beach there. And so it was kind of our thing.
So it was only you guys. There was no girls there?
They wandered in and out, yes. Yes, nobody ever said a word about get off our beach. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing that was astounding to me there was with the cars, I think I mentioned to you that I got somebody to buy my yellow Buick convertible, and I bought a MGA, or is that a B? I think it was MGB there from one of the pilots that was leaving the area, and a beautiful little car, and it was only about a year old. I had very low mileage on it. But what we did, those of us who did surf, and I didn't surf much because those boards at that time were so heavy, and it was a lot of work to surf, and I just didn't like to do it that much. But to play the part with the other guys when they're going surfing, we'd put the surfboards up sticking up out of the open little sports cars, and play big time, driving through the proper streets through Waikiki down to the beach, and park and get our surfboards off. So we just goofy stuff like that. Anytime we felt a little bit bored, we'd just drive around the island, so all the way around the edge.
It sounds like a lot of play, not too much work on that year, huh?
Not much work.
Yeah.
We worked hard when we worked, but we had a lot of time off.
Yeah.
We went frequently. You had at least once a week. You had a 36-hour straight without a break. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we would be working, but it was just so much fun that you worked, and then you knew somebody was right behind you. There'd be somebody, no matter what was going on and how serious it was, somebody was going to replace you at that time. So it was fun. It was difficult. I started out over there originally doing obstetrics. I had to do obstetrics for the first 6 to 8 weeks. I can't remember what it was, something in that range, the way it was set up. And I did not have obstetrics in med school. We didn't have any at University of Wisconsin.
What is that?
I'm sorry?
What is that?
We didn't have any obstetrics.
What is obstetrics?
Obstetrics?
Yeah.
Delivering babies.
Okay.
Delivering babies. And a lot. We had a very busy OB section up there for delivering. And we had 4, 5, or 6 delivery rooms. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, we could deliver 5 or 6 at a time. It was so busy, and we would have one great big room for all the gals who were in labor before we had to take them in for delivery. And they'd be in there for anywhere from a couple hours to 24 hours in that room. And we'd be going in and out periodically just to check them, see how they're doing on the labor, how far along they were. And when they were ready to go, we'd wheel them down into the delivery room, which raised one of the funniest things that I'd ever seen. We couldn't find one of our interns, Sleepy Joe. And Sleepy Joe was a funny little guy from Georgia, smart, but nobody ever knew what was going on in his head. We couldn't find him one night when he was with us. There's always at least 3 of us doing OBs at the same time up there, along with the residents in training who would sleep in the same sleep room with us right on the OB ward, so that we always had backup constantly. They overseeing us all the time, the residents. But we couldn't find Joe. And the nurses knew where he was. So they pointed us down there, took us to the particular delivery room he was. And there was a big old Samoan mother. And then we had a lot of those really big gals. And he had finished the delivery and was just sewing the episiotomy back up again. I apparently got partway through. I can't remember where he was. And there was Joe. The mother who had just delivered was asleep. And Joe was back there supposedly sewing, with his head laying on her thigh, and he was fast asleep. So that's vivid in my mind for crazy dumb things. No harm done, but it was not the proper thing to do.
Protocol.
Yeah. We did have another fun thing that we did with our cars over on the north side of the island on an old Air Force base that was real active during World War II. Kahuku was reconfigured into a racing set. So as you go around it, it was set up so you had left turns, you had right turns, you had U-turns, you had sharps, and all this sort of thing through the track. So it wasn't just fast speed. You had to really perform. So must have been at least a half a dozen of us drove that and did a little racing driving there, which was a lot of fun. A lot of fun doing that, running those cars. And the hottest thing that I ever was able to get into, and it didn't handle well, was a little Austin Healey that somebody had put a Chrysler 300 engine in it. And the thing was absolutely wicked. You know, you'd come out of a turn and you'd hit that accelerator and it would fishtail. It was so small and so light, and all the weight was up the front. Yeah. So just crazy little things like that. It was just a wonderful time. Did whatever, was happy. The other great experience was one night coming home from a party. Scooter was Bert Pruitt from Charleston, South Carolina. And fun guy. I mean, everybody loves Scooter. You're a little guy about 5'6", and full of jokes, and loved to tell jokes, and a fantastic dancer. So at the officers' clubs, was music every night. When we go in one of those, all the girls wanted to dance with Scooter. So we were leaving a party. It must have been, I don't know, midnight or after or whatever, down in Waikiki, and going back up to the hospital. It was our BOQs where we were living, was next to the hospital. We were going in, and there was kids selling papers out on the street, which was very common back to 10, 12-year-old kids all night long selling newspapers. And it was special calling, and so we grabbed a paper as we were driving by one of them, and we see Kilauea Iki erupts. That's the big volcano there that periodically erupts. Pele is angry again, Pele, the goddess of fire. So, big deal. I know it was dramatic. It was fantastic. Just the little pictures they had there that quick that got into the paper. But Scooter said, "Let's go." He was driving his car. "Let's go." "Oh, we can't go to work. We're supposed to be at work tomorrow morning. We'll be at the hospital tomorrow morning." He said, "We'll go. We'll go." So we drove over to the airport, and we wandered in, and Scooter started talking to the people milling around there around the operations center. He got one guy that said he would take us down there in his four-seater. I don't know, a single, probably a double twin engine, I'm not sure, but anyway, it was a four-seater. So whatever it was, Scooter paid for it, I didn't. And we got on an airplane, we flew down there, and it was a great experience because he would get down as low as he possibly could with that Kilauea ripping up and big massive stones coming up 500 feet or more, shooting up all solid red hot coals, massive coals, some as big as the airplane. And then he would roll it to the side there so we could take all our pictures down through the window, down into the end of the thing. And we did that for quite some time that night. And then landed down at the base there on the big island. And the pilot took off. We never saw him again. I didn't. And so we were stuck down there, and well, we got to get home somehow. And again, before we went that night, though, we also hiked up as close as we could. At night, it was early morning by that time, up there, and would sit around the old Hawaiians that would be up around as close as they could get to that thing, and ungodly hot. With all that steam coming up out of there, because we were not closer than I don't know what, 50 to 75 yards. I don't think we were even that close, probably. It's just hard telling. Listening to them chant in Hawaiian, and they try to throw things in there like things that were supposed to be appeasement to Pele, the goddess of fire, and it was a good experience just sitting and going through that. And the next day we decided we better get back, so we went down to the airport, and somehow Scooter arranged something. We got on an airplane and went back. And surprising was, I thought we'd probably get at least an Article 15, which is pretty severe punishment, or we'd be court-martialed because we were AWOL. So the surprising part, we were both on an elective month. For all that year, we each got a month that you could take an elective and not have to be assigned to OB or surgery or whatever at that time. And I was on pathology, I believe, yeah. And Scooter was on some unusual subspecialty as well. I can't remember what he was on. And for some reason, people never missed us. So we came in and just went back to work. But my pictures all disappeared somewhere. I didn't have a great collection of them, but I had them and brought them back with me and all. But that was some of the pictures that have over time just disappeared. Scooter, I've been at his house in Charleston, and we sat there one night and reviewed a lot of them that he had. Absolutely beautiful stuff. The pictures that we had looking down into the eruption.
Were they in color?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
We did it all was just on 35 millimeter. Again, we were kids that had some money for the first time, so we bought good cameras. Mine was an Argus C3. I remember that. I don't know what Scooter was shooting. He's got some gorgeous ones, beautiful ones. I guess that was really most of the big time stuff. The question was then, by that time, we were getting close to the end, later on, of our year there. We had to find out where we were going. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of set up to go to Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. and do a urology residency. I thought maybe that's what I wanted to do. And the more I got into it, and the more I spent in the operating room at Tripler when I was there, the less I liked it. The less I liked the personalities in the operating room and all this that goes with surgery. So I decided not to. So I joined there were half a dozen of us, or 8 of us, I think, total. We all decided what we would do. We'd go to flight surgery school instead. So we all went directly from there to San Antonio, Texas, to go to flight surgery school, which was very short, like 2 months, I can't remember, something like that. And it was just basic general practice of medicine primarily, along with some of the unusual things that can happen in aircraft. So we did that, and then still it was a question of where. About that same time we got assigned there, we decided we would take it. We all got an assignment to our permanent base. And a couple of guys in the group that I went with, or that we still meet regularly, one from Boston, one from New York City, one from also in a Penn, one from Penn. And these guys, most of them wanted someplace, either Philadelphia or DC, or DC or New York City. That's where they wanted to go at that point so they could be set up for their next specialty training, to be indoctrinated into the area. I had no idea what I was going to do, so I said, send me whatever works out best. Well, the guys were upset with me when the orders came through. I got a base that did nothing but run paperwork through periodically, but had a nice little hospital about 30 to 45 minutes, whatever, out of downtown Manhattan. And so I again, I just lucked out. There I was. But in order to get there, then I'd had to, well, before I got to Texas, even from flight surgery school, I had to stop, and I flew back over. I had to pick up my car in Oakland. And I remember at that time, I drove nonstop from San Francisco straight down to Los Angeles and then directly across to Phoenix without a top or on a car or without a heater in the middle of summer. And it was hot coming across the desert. and then drove that same car for a little bit around down there until I finally found someplace I could trade it for something that I could drive to New York on after flight surgery training. And that's when I got my 4-seater Thunderbird convertible. Yeah, so that's what I drove out with it, and then got to New York City. And it was not that much to do up there, but it was just a fantastic place to go, and we took advantage of it because they had a program through the USO that any active duty military could get 2 free tickets every night of the week for any Broadway show where there were any tickets available that had been turned in or whatever. And by this time, I was dating Tony regularly, your grandmother, and she was on active duty as a flight nurse. So she could get 2 tickets, and I could get 2 tickets. So we would take one of my good friends from Wisconsin was doing his internship in New York City, and he was putting in incredible hours. But any night that he could get away for some reason, I'd get 2 tickets, she'd get 2 tickets, and we'd go pick up he and his girlfriend and take him to a Broadway show. Again, crazy things. And then after shows, we would go down, Tony and I would go down to an area called Hell's Kitchen and go in there to some jazz spot, some little, and there was one place we used to go into I loved to do because they would play up to announcing this sort of thing. And I remember whenever I'd walk into that place, and at that time in New York, you dressed quite nice, a Chesterfield top coat and wearing a top hat. There's just, everybody did it. That's the way you dressed. I walk in there, and the guy at the desk would give out a big yell, "John Owens, attention, attention, the Duke of Edinburgh has just arrived." That's what I don't know where he came up with that, but that's the entrance I got. And we'd sit there and listen to good music in that place. That's the type of life we lived there. I don't beat that to death, but that was our life we there, and really nothing to do. If guys wanted, one of the guys had a daughter getting married, so he really filled up with good champagne. So it's something we could do. We went down, talking to one of the pilots, and went over to base operations. We checked out a C-47, which is pretty good size at that time, pretty good size transport airplane, and just went to Bermuda. Yeah, it was Bermuda, I think, for the weekend. Just checked it out and took off. Went down there and lifted out the floorboards in this thing, filled it up with all the champagne that he wanted, stuff, put the floorboards back down, and came back home. We pulled into base operations on the base, and I had to clear, just like commercial planes, we had to clear operations. And the guys came out for inspection and walked up on the plane and said, "You guys didn't bring anything home that you weren't supposed to, did you?" "No, sir." "All right." Waved us on through. Another crazy thing like that. It was a play life. It didn't even seem like a real life to me. It was a play thing. So, what a time. But that base closed. I got there in September, I think it was September, and I met your grandmother then shortly after I got there. It would have been like the 1st of October, who was at that time, I don't know what she was her status. She had just, the guy that there was a flight surgeon in the spot that I took when I got there that had just left and went down to New Orleans to take an ophthalmology residency. He got out of the Air Force. She was supposedly engaged to him, but one of the pilots insisted that your grandmother was married, was engaged to him. So I don't know, somehow I just asked her to go to dinner with me or go into a show in New York or something, and pretty soon I was the guy that was dating her. And those guys just kind of disappeared. So we started spending a lot of time together, and it was great. She was really a real sweetheart. She was. I wasn't interested in doing anything much more because I still hadn't gotten over my Dear John and what was my great romantic life. But she was just she was very pretty. She was charming. She was a sophisticate in the world of the colors and things. We just spent more and more time together. I mean, the base was closing very quickly. By February or March, we got the word the base is closing. Now what do we do? I was waiting for my orders because I didn't know if one of the guys in my flight surgery office who was a colonel, a light colonel, but he was just putting in his time. He didn't see patients. He didn't do anything but sit around and play cards with some of the sergeants and things. That's all he did. But he had a girlfriend who worked in the assignment center down at the Pentagon. So he'd keep track every couple of days of what might be in line for me, where I was supposed to go. And I could have some yes or no, I don't want it. The first one that came through, I was to go to Tehran, as an air attaché. Well, for a guy who's an introvert and knows nothing about politics or even where the hell Iran was, I said, no, I just can't do that. I'm not going. So I was still kind of in limbo at that time when we were due. And it was about that time that when the base was closing, that we had to do something with a bunch of planes. We had a lot of those C-47s, and they were getting a little old, those transport planes. So a decision was made that those would be given to the Air Force in Venezuela. So what we did, a couple of pilots would get on each one of the planes, and I jumped on one of them too, and I just went with the guys. I said, go along, you need a flight surgeon on board when you go around. And we were going to fly them to Venezuela, flying down the coast, and then take it to the big, right at the tip of Florida, what am I thinking of? What's the very tip of the Florida, down at the bottom of the Florida? Anyway,
Orlando? Huh?
No, it's
I didn't get.
yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Key West.
Yeah.
Keys.
Yeah, that's where we were. We were down on the tip there, and one night, because we had lost about 2 or 3 of our planes because they were just not good enough to keep going. So guys we'd stop somewhere along the line coming down. That was about 5 days getting down to Florida from New York. And they would take off parts of some of these planes that were going to leave there anyway and put them on so we could keep on going. We got down that far, and we got in there at the naval base on the tip, and all hungry as hell. It was late at night. Must have been 1 o'clock in the morning. It was during the night sometime. And so one place was open, and that was a Navy Chiefs Club. The chiefs in the Navy are like the sergeants of the Army Air Force. So we went to the Chiefs Club, and we were treated with respect. They didn't care if officers came in there. We were getting something to eat, and a page comes through on the speaker system at the club. Paging, Captain Ryan. And everybody, all these guys in the place that were sitting there, all jumped to attention. A Navy captain is a bird colonel in the Air Force. They didn't realize at the time that I was an Air Force colonel or captain. And it was funny. And I went and took and I calmed down and said, I had a big laugh over that. And I took the call and identified myself. And it was, Lee, this is Red. He was a base commander up in New York. The base commander. He was the guy that I used to have dinner with a lot.
Commander's a 1-star?
I'm sorry?
Commander's a 1-star?
No, he wasn't. He hadn't gotten his star yet. He was still a bird colonel. He got his star later. Yeah. And he said, what are you doing? how do you know where we are? He said, you fool. He said, you're green to this Air Force. I know where you guys are all the time. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, Tony just got orders to somewhere in the Middle East. I can't even where it was.
Saudi Arabia.
Where was it?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. Is that where it was? Okay, I got corrected. And I said, well, good for her. He said, well, are you going to let her go? He said, she can do whatever she wants. I can't. I'm not doing. Well, he said, come on. He said, aren't you going to marry her? And I said, I don't know. I don't know anything about getting married to her. He said, well, you better take it. Nobody else is going to marry you. So he said, all right then. I will block her assignment until you guys get back here, and then we'll talk about it. And that's where somehow we just kept talking about it, and we ended up getting married. She knew it wasn't the right thing. I knew it wasn't the right thing because we hardly knew each other, I think. But that way she could get out of the Air Force and wouldn't have to take another assignment if she got married. And we got along fine and all. It was just a marriage, And so that's how I moved from there. And then my orders came through. And I finally, they kept sending things at me that didn't sound good. One day he asked me, would you accept an assignment as a flight surgeon on a space program? I said, of course I will. I'll take that. So I say, I'll be a flight surgeon on Project Mercury. So I'll take it. Well, then the orders came through in writing. That space program was actually a research program out on the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, southern New Mexico. And I took it, and I was obligated to it then. So we got married the week before we took off, before we headed down there. And when we came onto that base, your grandmother started crying. I mean, crying hard. We were going to live here? It was the middle of nowhere. It was awful. The White Sands is beautiful, but you can't live on the White Sands. It's desert. It's a protected desert, so you have to live on the edge of it.
Okay.
We have kind of a loose organization here. We're not going to make it too military, like you said, but we have to look like the Air Force. After we're in the military, guy said, your job is to find out, to determine the human tolerance to impact of different levels in 100 millisecond time or less. You're on your own. That's it. You walked out of the room. There's nothing been written. There was nothing in the literature. So we started from scratch to build that, the three of us, and put the thing together and had to constantly writing papers. I don't know how much stuff. I ran onto some of it on the internet not too long ago, a year or two ago when I was looking for stuff. That was some of the stuff that I'd published that was on there on heart patterns during impact and organ shifts during impact and all this sort of thing. Did it, but we were stuck there out in the middle of the desert for 2 years, and by that time I was eligible to get out. I'd paid off all what I owed the Air Force. I was eligible to get out, but I couldn't find a good residency. I decided by that time, after spent a lot of time with a young ophthalmologist up in New York when we were there. I was convinced that ophthalmology would be really a good specialty. Something where you could do surgery, but you do it yourself. Nobody can look over your shoulder when you're doing it. And there wouldn't be any long surgical cases. You won't have any emergencies. It all sounded so good. So I said, I'll take an ophthalmology residency. But I couldn't get one. Ophthalmology residencies were being filled up 2-3 years ahead. All over the country. There was none available anywhere, sort of thing. But I let the colonel know what I was going to do, and he contacted somebody who came out of, this probably also came out of assignment division, anyway, in Washington. And he brought a note to me saying, we've been informed that one of the first-year residents at University of California in San Francisco has dropped out of the residency program. And they are looking to fill that spot right away with somebody who has some knowledge of ophthalmology, because the guys that were there were already, the first year residents were pretty far along that first year. And for some reason, he decided I probably could do that. And I had no idea why I could do it. So I flew up to San Francisco to look at it. And at that point, that was one of the maybe top half a dozen or 10 whatever residencies in the program, headed up by a guy by the name of Mike Hogan. He was an incredible guy. And I went in, he said, well, I'm going to hand you off here to my boys. One of the other young professors took me around through the department and in the operating room and all, and this is what you'll be doing, And I thought, I don't know how I can do this, but if they think I can, I'll do it. And I said, well, I want you to talk to, I had his name, forgot it. He was a Chinese ophthalmologist who was a deputy chair of the Department of Ophthalmology at UC. And I went in and to him, and he just sat there looking at flipping papers when I went in. He said, sit down. So I sat down. He's still flipping papers. He said something about, you think you're good enough for this? And I like a good soldier, I said, well, yes, sir, I hope I can. I plan on doing a good job. And he's pipping, and he said, you weren't an AOA, were you? That's the top 5% of the graduates in the country. And I said, no, sir, I wasn't. He kept flipping. He says, you weren't even a Phi Beta Kappa. And I said, no, sir, I wasn't. He said, well, we have no place for you here then. You can leave. That was the end of that one. It was all over. And I went back down to the base, and I started looking around for someplace I could get a residence. Everything was full for 2 or 3 years ahead. But then again, somehow the word got out, and I don't know who got it for me. Somebody did a good job getting it. And it came out of Washington. The Navy, at the Naval Hospital in Oakland, which was part of the University of California system and part of the Stanford system, and both back and forth there, they had somebody just dropped out. Would you be interested in that? And I said, it sounds fantastic. I'll go take a look at it. So I jumped on a plane and went up to take a look at it. And it was a fantastic program. A lot of surgery, and I could see why the guy dropped out. The Navy captain who was chairman of the department there was an arrogant ass. His only real goal in life was to get as many girls as he could. So I could see why there'd been trouble in the department there. So anyway, I said, all right, I'll gladly take it. And that was I got the assignment as soon as possible. I was up there into Oakland, and your mother was born, what, 4 or 5 months after we got there, whenever, and put in the full 3 years there, and then a lot of times back and forth. We had to spend one night a week. That nights would start about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so early as soon as you get away from clinic. From then until 9 o'clock at night, across the bridge into downtown San Francisco, and that's where the Stanford Medical School was at that time, before they moved down to film. It was right in the center there. So what's now Presbyterian Medical Center. So we'd have to do that. And by the next morning, by the time we got back that night, we wouldn't get out of the classes over till maybe 9 or 10 o'clock at night, whenever they would tend to break them up. And then we had to drive all the way across through surface streets in San Francisco, across the bridge, and then back up to Oakland, which was about the Naval Hospital, probably another 20 or 30 minutes in Oakland to get up into the Oakland Hills where it was. And so we were exhausted by the next morning. But, as the captain said, you will be in seeing patients and making rounds at 7 a.m. every morning. So it took a lot of time. And periodically we would be allowed to be off during that first year. We'd be away and be going full time to San Francisco, the University Hospital in San Francisco with those people. So it was an excellent training program. I I couldn't imagine better training than what I got when I was there. They were very, very good to me. And again, we're still, that bunch is still very close together also. The captain didn't last long, and they got somebody else in that was very benign. He didn't know anything, but he was he was very benign, easy to get along with. Went through the program. So I guess the next step after that, I'm trying to think what that would be. The next step after that would be, where do I go from here? And things are starting to get a little nasty in Vietnam. And so the idea was you should go over there. And I said, I can't do it. I have a daughter, your mother, who has a congenitally displaced hip. She's already had her preliminary surgery. That's when they cut her some cords, muscle cords in her leg, right away, probably in the first month or 6 weeks of her life. And I can't do it. I've got this daughter that I can't leave, which I could have probably, but I didn't. So they said, well, we shouldn't do this. But the guy, Jim Raspberry, out at Travis, which was only, 45 minutes out of the city, out there, out in Tony, has decided to get out. He was a senior major, had put all his obligation time in. Would that be all right for your daughter? And I said, yeah, that'll be all right. I'll take that. So that's where I spent my next 3 years. But I spent a lot of time back and forth to Vietnam during that time. That was one of the major things they did, in and out there. Did a lot of surgery. It was a good-sized hospital. The medical school was just opening at that time at UC Davis, which was just up the road from our base. And so I got my clinical professorship at UC Davis at that time. I don't know whatever happened to that diploma, big certificate, but somewhere it must be. That was pretty much my life until the 3 years there. I had the 3 years in Oakland during my training and the 3 years up at Travis. And then I was ready to get out. And just from then on, I knew I was getting out. Probably wasn't a smart decision. By that time, I had 11 years in. And I knew it 9 years away from a big fat pension for the rest of my life. And I'd have been, 43 years old when I got out. But I thought I'd had enough of it. I almost stayed because I had an offer to stay as a teaching professor at Stanford. And I thought, boy, this would look so good on a resume to have that thing on there. But I don't know, I started looking around at other things, and Tony, your grandmother, wasn't anxious about staying up there. She wanted to get back down south there where around her family in Los Angeles area. I know I kept looking at different things, and I was looking through a journal. I think it was AMA, just some journal anywhere, and there was just comments of people looking for different specialists and sort of thing. And I saw a 12-man medical group in Lemon Grove, California, wants an ophthalmologist in their group. Well, my next job was, where the hell is Lemon Grove, California? So once I looked, chased that down, I found this tiny little suburb out on the eastern edge of San Diego. So I drove down to look at that, and I flew down to look at that. And when I got there, I was kind of dumbfounded. I found out, not in that group, but the guy that I was with when I took my residency in Oakland was a endocrinologist, oncologist doing cancer work as well as all blood work, blood studies. He had gotten out of the Navy and had gone down to San Diego, and he was the head of the blood donor system, anyway, for the whole system for San Diego County in there. So I ran onto him, and after talking to him about the wonders of San Diego, I end up, the day I got there when I flew down, I was kind of stunned anyway. That would have been about February or March of, 69. And it was during that time when in San Francisco wasn't bad, out in the valley up in that area, every day was overcast, rainy, cool, and I landed in San Diego, and it was one of those perfect days. Everything was perfect. And I thought, Stanford won't match this. So I took a job with them. And they were very generous. They gave me a starting salary. Since I was already board certified specialist, I had spent time doing that while I was in San Francisco getting certified. They were very kind to me. They offered me a starting salary of $1,000 a month, which was not a hell of a lot more than I was making as a lieutenant colonel, and I just made it. But I figured, but it'll work. So immediately I went back up and talked it over with Tony, your grandmother, and she was very, very interested in it. So we came back down, and we drove down, stayed with her parents, your grandma and Grandpa Martini, in L.A. area, and that time we go down to San Diego and looked it over and started house hunting. And you know, your grandfather, Grandpa Martini, he was so good to everybody. I mean, he's just a wonderful guy. And he said, get a house that you really want. He said, but you know, we get the kind of salary we have, and we have nothing put away. We can't buy a nice house. He said, buy a nice house. I assure you, it'll be all right. He was just that kind of guy. So we did buy a nice little house. We really splurged for that area. We bought in a nice area on a golf course, and paid. I sold the house we had up in San Francisco, out at the Travis Air Force Base, one a real nice home up there that I paid $19,000 for. So bought this one down there. It was $36,000 for that house. So I'll never get that paid off. She saw it. We looked at it together, my brother and I, and then we loved that little house. Bought that right away. I got out of the Air Force, put in my assignment, and that's when they didn't want to let me out. I did go some problem there. They started telling me all of the things that they're going to do for me in the Air Force. And I don't know if you're going to go into that, but some of the things they want to do, I was a lieutenant colonel ahead of time. I was not eligible. I was below the zone when I got promoted, below the zone. And we're sure that we give you promotion of bird colonel. You'll have your bird, your eagles, in another 3 years. Well, it's supposed to be 20 years before you get that in. So that's what they do. He said, now we have plans for you. This is a representative from the Pentagon assignment division that came out to try to persuade people to stay in, and people were getting out. And he said that you'll have to spend 1 year unaccompanied in Vietnam. And that didn't sound good to me at all, unaccompanied. But in Vietnam, that's what you had to do. And everybody went for a year anyway. And that didn't sound good to me at all. But he said, you're going to be a pretty high rank by that time. You know that? You're getting way up there. From there, you're going to have to go to Command and Staff School, which is like a postgraduate school for, I don't know, 6 months or whatever it is, that sort of thing. You have to go to War College if you're going to ever go up the land further. You do that. And what else they had going? Oh, you'll have to spend one tour of short duration probably at the Pentagon in their decision making. And then we would plan on you taking over at the new, what's the name of that hospital in San Antonio? The Air Force Hospital. They built a big, large hospital, like a major university hospital system, who's going to be part of the University of Texas Medical School. And you'll take that over. All of that would have been away from clinical medicine. And I said, is this what I went to med school for? And I went through all my training for and got my certification. It just didn't add up. that for me. So I turned it down and went and got out and went with Tony. We did very well down there in San Diego. Got a practice really rolling, and it didn't go in with friends because they had a little meeting in the American Academy of Ophthalmology, a little clinic group, guys, maybe a half, 5 or 6, I can't remember how many group. Anyway, later on, when I was at Benner for some time, many years, I was brought into that group. And what this group was anybody that wanted to get into town, we would go talk to. Totally unethical, dishonest things. And tell them, make up any kind of stories we want, either to get them into town or make sure he didn't get there. And so I met with those guys, and they said they didn't want me in town because there already were 70, I was around number something like 70 ophthalmologists in town. And there's just no room for anybody else. You're just not going to make it here. No way you can make it here. I said, well, I'm going to be out in Lemon Grove with this bunch of GPs out there. She said, those aren't really very ethical guys out there. And I said, I haven't heard anything like that, but this is the sort of thing I was getting constantly. So I went ahead and took it. They were unhappy as can be about it, but I went ahead and took it. And it settled on. As long as you weren't a hustler and sort of thing, nobody ever gave me trouble once I got there. As long as I wasn't trying to drive somebody else out of town and spreading stories about how bad some other surgeon was in the area and this sort of thing. So worked out fine. I don't know where we go from here.
Yeah, well, so you were you were never. How much time did you spend in Vietnam? Yeah, you were deployed. Right?
Never more than about 8 hours.
Okay.
I'd be in. I was a chief of ophthalmology for the Air Force for the Pacific Theater. That went all the way from California, all through the Pacific, into Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, the whole works there. And there was ophthalmologists at every one of these places, most of whom knew more than I did. But I was the commander. I was the chief of this thing, so I had to show up. So we'd go. We had out of Travis Air Force Base up in the one up between San Francisco and Sacramento, there that I flew out of there, where the big hospital was, Travis, where I did all my surgery. We flew out of there, and that was the main demarcation point to Vietnam out of California, out of the U.S. We had probably anywhere from maybe 5 to as many as 15 or 20 flights a day out of there into Vietnam. And taking over supplies, new troops, everything imaginable, taken in there, and bringing back whatever we had to bring back at that time, living or dead, bringing them back. But when I got there, I was to inspect the medical system, the surgery that was being done, ethics, dishonesty, all that sort of thing, which was crazy because we were fighting a war. Nobody was interested in making a fortune or doing anything unusual. So I did. That's what I spent the time on. And I was supposed to go once a month. I never did that. I don't sure ever got there more than average of every 2 months or more maybe before I did. Because there's no reason for me to do it. For me, it was a shopping trip. Because every place we'd stop along the line, you don't stay with the same crew. I have my open orders for everything. I could just walk into base operations at any military base, hand in my orders and say, I'll take the next plane you have going, wherever it is, wherever I wanted to go. So I could do all kinds of stuff. I love going to some of the wood carving companies of hand carving in the Philippines for dishes and bowls and things. I spent time doing some of that stuff. Go see them, bring a lot of stuff back. I'd go into Thailand and go looking at rare stones, good stones, really expensive stones. And in fact, I went AWOL there once for about 3 or 4 days and then just stayed there. Nobody ever missed me. And got on a plane and came back after that. it was, we were in the middle of a war, but it was hard to tell. The only time it seemed like I'd get reminded of it when we were loading all the casualties on the planes. Every time I came back, we'd have a plane load of casualties. They could empty out that big C-141 cargo plane, empty that out, and configure it as a hospital plane in overnight, where they had, I don't know how many guys could be on there. There were 3 levels high all the way through that entire plane, flat beds, very tiny, poorly, not really true beds, but a place you could put people on. It was almost surreal when I look back on it now. That the whole concept, the way the whole thing developed, and what we did. I remember we had a holdover one night where we had to spend time. We got something to eat at Cameron Bay, beautiful bay and beach. I mean, the hospital was sitting right on the edge of the bay, so we were held up there for most of the night. So we were just kind of laying in the hospital, and when the sun came up, we went out the next morning, and looking out there, and I didn't see this, but I was told that it was taken down before we got out there, that there was a rifle stuck in the sand there with barrel up and the knife, whatever, the band, whatever it is, I'm blacking now, with the head that had been cut off of one of our attendants in our hospital, and had been taken. I never saw it, and I just accepted what they said was there. But as we were talking, the pilot I was flying with that time, a guy by the name of Homburg, he said, "You know what? This war is so dumb. And look at this beautiful beach out here," he said. "If they would just turn this war over to us Jews, we'd have this war over in 6 months and have a beautiful hotel right here where we're standing." A line I'll never forget. And he was probably right. It was unbelievable. We never took any hits, to my knowledge. Nobody ever shot at me. We'd take sometimes when we were coming in some of the bases to land to pick up stuff. Sometimes when we came in out on the edge of the runway, there would be just through the approach, there'd be some small arms there that would shoot up at us, trying to knock us down in a big plane. So it'd be little small arm stuff that would be bouncing off the plane or something. And I didn't know what was happening. They'd show me where it hit. I never saw anything or felt anything or anything. So it was, were you ever shot at? I can't even lie and say that I might have been. I don't know. But that was 3 years of my life. 3 years of my life. Crazy. I've lived in a fantasy world. I really have. And your grandmother, God bless her, accepted everything. She never really objected to anything. She was unhappy about going to White Sands Missile Range, but I think anybody would have been there. And she put up with it. In fact, she even worked there. They had a nice, moderate-sized hospital there, because the only Air Force hospital and a military hospital of any kind in that whole area of southern New Mexico. And so she actually worked over there in obstetrics, and seemed to really like it. Made a lot of friends there. She did, and she was good about the whole thing all the way through. It was just to her, we were at war. We'll do whatever we need to do. Get through here. She accepted it perfectly well. Wherever we went, whatever we had to do, she just went along with it. So I have nothing but admiration for all that she put through there, all that she went through. And we had talked about it at times with the thing, and I might as well get that on there, I guess, there too. I don't want to butter things up, but we had talked times that, do we really belong together? We both knew that we didn't really belong together. She didn't want to get married to me. I didn't want to get married to anybody. But we did it. And my excuse always was, whenever it would come up, why did you do it? When I'd come up and I would talk to people about it. And psychiatrists and so I talk to them about it because it would bother me. But I'm married to somebody that doesn't want to be married to me, and I don't really want to be married at all with it. And he said, well, why didn't you get out of it? And I said, one simple reason. I didn't have enough balls to do it. That's what it was. That's what it was. So I know she went through some bad times there toward the end, really bad. It just tore me up when I found out about all this. It tore me up because she really was not only a nice person, she was a good person, and she was just a good human being. Very nice person, very nice, and a good wife. I thought she was a great mother. Of course, how would I be able to judge that? I wasn't around much, but it was not a life that I couldn't have continued right on through forever. I could have done it. It'd have been just getting along, because at the time that we split up, at that point, I was not around that much. I was in the middle of a lot of things going that I kind of fell into after I got to be there, getting in there. I was one of the executive officers of the San Diego County Medical Society. That was a medical group of 3,800 doctors. I was the president of the San Diego Academy of Ophthalmologists. I was the president-elect for a couple of years until I didn't take it, president of the California Association of Ophthalmology. I was on the board of the California Medical Association. So I was gone a lot. And I was teaching part-time, not only at the UCSC of the medical school, which was really starting to roll there, but I also did some traveling to teach at meetings around the country, different type of short-term 5-day meetings, 4-day meetings, this sort of thing. That'd be put together, and they just would ask particular people to come in and talk at them and present something. So I was gone a lot. So she put up a lot with that. I would come and go. And I was having my life that I was really relishing, and she was stuck at home with 2 little kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know where to go with that, but I have no ill will